Morning, everybody. We should all have a good year. Hope everyone had a nice and meaningful Yom Kippur. We're going to do Parshas Zos HaBracha this week. Full disclosure, whether or not it rains on Shabbos, the laning for the Shabbos is not for Zos HaBracha because it's Sukkot. But God willing, the next week, for Simchas Torah, we lane Zos HaBracha. So I figure we'll do Zos HaBracha now. I don't expect to meet next week during Chol Hamoed. So this will be our Zos HaBracha week. So we'll begin with chapter 33, verse 4, a very famous pasuk. Torah tziva lanu Moshe. Moshe instructed us in the Torah, Morasha Kilas Yaakov. It is an inheritance for the congregation of Jacob. There's a number of things that just jump out in this pasuk. First of all, Moshe's talking. So why is he referring to himself in the third person? It just jumps, should it could be I conveyed the Torah. What is it? Moshe commanded us the Torah. Morasha is an interesting word choice. Morasha, actually before being a camp, Morasha means a language of inheritance. It certainly makes sense, but you just ask yourself, like, of all the possible languages, why did I have to say an inheritance? Kihilas Yaakov is also interesting. Kihilas means like a congregation, a gathering. Again, it's certainly a word we're familiar with, but it doesn't show up that much in Chumash, to the best of my recollection. And when you talk about the Jewish people, I don't mean it never does, but it's just an interesting word choices. Let's just see the next verse because we'll get into some other things. Verse 5, Vayivi Shurun Melech, and it will be in Yeshurun a king. Yeshurun seems to be a reference to the Jewish people. But we have to understand what it is about the word Yeshurun that implies the Jewish people. Bisasef Rashi Yachad Shiftei Yisrael. When the heads of nations gather together, the tribes of Israel. The words aren't so hard to translate, but what in the world is going on in these psukim is a little tricky. Let's start with the Ramban. Ramban on Pasuk Daled. Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe. Hatam. The meaning here is Sheyisa Tamid V'Yomar Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe. The Jewish people should always hold on to this principle, should always carry forth this concept that Moshe instructed us in the Torah. V'hi tia morasha l'kilas Yaakov. And this Torah and the attitude about the Torah is an inheritance to the congregation of Jacob. Ki l'doros olam kol b'nei Yaakov yirashua. That for generations throughout time, all the descendants of Yaakov will inherit this Torah, v'yishmeru osa, and will observe it. Ki lo sishachach mepisaro. It will not be forgotten from the offspring of the Jewish people, this Torah. So it's very interesting that Moshe is not saying what Moshe is saying. Moshe is saying this is an attitude and an outlook that needs to be conveyed to Jewish people for generations, to always see the Torah as being what was instructed to them through Moshe, and this is an inheritance for generations. The Darshu Zal, the rabbis teach, Shlo Amar Morasha Beis Yaakov, Ozera Yaakov, this question that we've touched on, it doesn't say it's an inheritance to the house of Jacob or to the offspring of Jacob. The Amar Kilas, it said the congregation, Lirmos to allude to, Shikalu Rabbim Aleim, that many people will converge upon the Jewish people. V'sia Torah Morasha La'olam, L'Yaakov U'L'chol Hanikolim Alav, that the Torah is an inheritance for Jacob, but not only for Jacob, and not only for Jacob's descendants. That's the significance of saying an inheritance, that it goes from generation to generation, but not only the descendants of Jacob, also the Kehila, the people who gather with Jacob. Who are those? Heim Hagerim, the converts. Hanilvim al Hashem l'shorso, who are joining in service of God. V'nikru kulam kilaso. So everyone is called the Kehila of Yaakov. So it's a really interesting idea, really beautiful idea to think about, that the Ramban is saying, I mean, he's quoting Midrashim for this, but the Ramban is saying that the word choice of Kilas Yaakov is every one of Klal Yisrael should see it as a birthright, but people who were not born into it should also understand that this Torah is a great gift to them that they could pass on from generation to generation. Converts as well. It's a powerful thing to think about. Let's see the next Ramban. Ramban on Pasuk Hey. Vayiv Yeshurun Melech. It will be when there is a king in Yeshurun. Remez El Hashem Haniskar Ki Haya L'Melech Al Yisrael Biyosam Yisharim. First of all, who is this king that we're talking about in verse 5? Says the Ramban, the king is Hashem. It's a reference to Hashem. And Hashem is the king of the Jewish people when they are Yeshurun. What does Yeshurun mean? Again, before it was a popular name for shuls all over the world, but Yeshurun is a language of Yashar. Yashar is straight. And presumably the Vav Nun is sort of like a plural form, presumably. So Yeshurun, when the Jewish people are straight, when the Jewish people are living the way we're supposed to live, then God is our king. V'nes v'kol rashei ha'am, and all the different heads of the nation gather together. V'chol shiftei Yisrael yachad, and all the tribes of Israel gather together. The Gamzeh Kasuf Davek, this pasuk is intended to be adjoined to the previous verse. Vatam, the understanding is, Ki Yisrael Yomru Tamid, the Jewish people should always say, HaTorah Shetziva Lanu Moshe, the Torah that Moshe instructed us, Tia Yerusha L'chol Klal Yisrael Ladeyad, should be an inheritance to all the Jewish people eternally. Lo nachlif v'lo namir osali olam. We'll never exchange it. We'll never switch it for something else. We'll never switch it for a different faith sect. V'yomru, and the Jewish people should continue to say, Shaya Hashem l'melech Yisrael bis asef rashenu zakanenu v'shoftenu, that God was a king, is a king on the Jewish people when we all get together. When our heads get together, when our elders get together, when our judges get together, v'chol shivtei Yisrael and all the tribes, shekulanu yachad kibalnu aleinu malchuso l'dor v'dor, that we all together accepted upon ourselves his kingship, his monarchy, generation to generation. V'anachnu chayavin lishmor toraso u'malchuso li'olamim. We are obligated to observe his Torah and his kingship for all time. This idea of accepting God as our king is a recognition of Anochi Hashem Elokecha, that I am Hashem your God. Vihine, his Kirat Torah bichlal u'malchus shamayim befrat. Between these two psukim, we've spoken about the Torah in verse 4, big picture, and recognizing God as our king, a little bit more narrow picture in verse 5. If we accept God's monarchy over the world, that in turn means that we deny the power of idols in our world. And accepting God's monarchy is really a recognition of the entire Torah. V'Ramaz, these two psukim are hinting, Kiheim v'Rashayim kiblu malchus shamayim b'pia gvura. The Jewish people and their heads accept the yoke of heaven from God. V'ra'u shu melech Yisrael v'goalo, and they see that God is the King of Israel and Israel's Redeemer. V'Torah kiblu mipi Moshe. So they accept God as their ruler and accept the Torah from Moshe. Shekiblu alam v'alzaram lahamin bo. This is an idea we've touched on many, many times through our travels through Chumash, but that the idea is, and this is a very important idea, that we can only accept the Torah if we accept the veracity of Moshe's conveying of the Torah. So we talk about recognizing God as our king, and we talk about recognizing Moshe's instructions of the Torah. Obviously, what makes the Torah special is not that Moshe said it. What makes the Torah special is that it comes from God. But Moshe is God's conduit, and we recognize that. So that's why it says Torah Tzivu Lanu Moshe. The Moshe Amru, okay. This is a correct and clear meaning in this verse. Okay. Skipping a couple lines. There's also a medrash as follows: Moshav's Kanim, Yeshiva Shalmata, Shmo Gadol, Mishtabach Lamala. That when elders come together in our world, then God's name is praised in the celestial realms. Shenemar, Vayiv Yeshurun Melech, Bisasef Rashayam. That when in Yeshurun there's a king, the heads of tribe, the heads of nation get together. Ein Asif Elas Canaan. When it talks about heads getting together, we mean the elders. Kishehem Asuyin Aguda Achas, Velo Kishehem Asuyin Agudos Agudos. This is such an important idea. Talk about it many times, but it gets a lot of emphasis in this time of year. What's a true Kiddush Hashem, what's a true sanctification of God's name, is when heads of different groups within Klal Yisrael sit together and are unified, and then the Yeshurun as a whole, the Jewish people as a whole, have a sense of God as our king. It's like God's throne is appropriately arranged when the Jewish people are one bundle below. Okay. Skipping about 5 lines. Some say the Melech in verse 5 is not God. Some say the Melech, the king in verse 5, is Moshe. The Medrash in Shmo says, Omro, Moshe Melech, that Moshe was considered a king, and it cites this pasuk. And if you understand it in that way, then the intent of the verse is that Moshe commanded us about the Torah, that it should be an inheritance to all the people of Yaakov. And he was a king upon us. And all of our tribe together. We should fulfill the words and commandments of Moshe, because he was a great king for us, a great leader for us. So the pasuk is telling us the greatness of the proxy, that he was a great person, so therefore we should believe him. Okay, so just to sum this up, the basic pshat the Ramban is saying is the Jewish people should remember for all time that the Torah was conveyed by Moshe Rabbeinu, and believe in that Torah and understand that it's passed on from generation to generation to the Kehila of Yaakov, meaning not only those born into Judaism, but those who converted as well. And then the next pasuk is saying, one pshat the Ramban is saying, the next pasuk is saying, you accept the Torah, now part and parcel with that, understand that God runs our world, and understand that we coronate God in the greatest of ways if we're united. And one of the greatest ways that we're united is if our leaders can get on the same page. That's one pshat in the pasuk. And the other pshat is that actually this is a follow-up to verse 4 in the sense that Moshe is our king. Moshe is our king because he gave us our marching orders, and that is the Torah. So we'll talk more about these in the following psukim tomorrow, God willing, but this is just the Ramban's perspective of things.